When Isla Renard uncovered the first secret buried in her family's past, she thought it was the end of her nightmare, but it was only the beginning. Every truth she unearthed led to darker lies. Every embrace came with the risk of betrayal, and every moment of love carried the shadow of danger. As the web of deceit tightened around her, Isla realized too late that the enemy she feared most wasn't lurking in the dark. It was sitting right beside her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady rhythm against the windows of Isla Renard's loft apartment. She sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her sharp green eyes and the delicate scar above her right eyebrow, a reminder of a childhood accident she never spoke about. At 32, Isla had built a life that appeared enviable to outsiders. A senior architect at a prestigious design firm, living in a bustling European city known for her precision, creativity, and relentless dedication. But beneath the polished exterior, Isla lived with a gnawing sense of unease, a shadow that had followed her for years. Her evenings were usually solitary, spent sketching new ideas or wandering through half-empty streets with her leather-bound journal. Tonight, however, something felt different. A restlessness churned inside her, pulling her away from the safety of routine. She closed her laptop, slipped on a trench coat, and stepped into the night, the cold air sharp against her skin. The city glistened under the rain. Neon lights reflected in puddles, and the sound of passing trams mingled with the hurried footsteps of strangers. Isla walked without direction, letting instinct guide her, until she found herself outside an old cafe tucked into a narrow alley. She had never noticed it before. Its dim sign read, "The Lantern's Rest." Pushing open the door, a small brass bell chimed. The cafe was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon and old wood. A handful of people sat scattered, sipping coffee or wine, but her attention was drawn to a man in the far corner. He was alone, his posture composed but alert, as if every detail of the room registered in his mind. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, steel blue, piercing, lifted to meet hers. For a moment, Isla froze. Something about him felt unsettlingly familiar, though she couldn't place where she had seen him before. He raised his glass in a silent acknowledgement. She gave a polite nod and chose a seat near the window, determined not to stare. But she could feel his gaze occasionally flicker toward her. When the server brought her coffee, a folded napkin accompanied the cup. Isla frowned, glancing down. Written in neat, careful handwriting were 5 words. "You shouldn't be here, Isla." Her pulse quickened. She looked around, but no one paid her any attention. The man in the corner was gone. The chair sat empty, as if he had vanished into thin air. The following morning, Isla tried to bury the incident beneath the weight of her work. She buried herself in blueprints, sketches, and project deadlines, convincing herself it had been some elaborate prank. Yet the unease lingered. That evening, as she locked her office, she noticed an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Her breath caught as she studied it. The image showed her standing outside the Lantern's Rest, her head tilted toward the neon sign. The photo was dated yesterday, just minutes before she entered the cafe. Her hands trembled. Someone had been watching her. Over the next few days, Isla's sense of being followed grew unbearable. Reflections in shop windows seemed to reveal blurred figures behind her. Footsteps echoed too close on empty streets. She stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, and her usually flawless focus at work fractured under the weight of paranoia. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, she confided in her closest friend, Marin Duval. Marin was everything Isla was not: outspoken, fiery, unafraid of confrontation. They had been inseparable since university, their bond strong enough to survive years of distance and difference. "You're sure you're not just imagining it?" Marin asked over glasses of red wine in Isla's apartment. "I'm not imagining it," Isla said firmly, placing the Polaroid on the table between them. "This was waiting for me. Someone is watching, Marin." Marin studied the photo, her brows furrowed. "This is not a coincidence." "But why you?" Isla shook her head. "I don't know. But that man in the cafe, he knew my name. I've never seen him before, and yet," she trailed off, unable to explain the flicker of recognition she had felt. "Then we find him," Marin said decisively. You're not facing this alone. For the first time in days, Isla felt a flicker of relief. But it was short-lived. 2 nights later, Maren didn't show up for their planned dinner. Isla called her phone repeatedly, each time met with a hollow ring that eventually cut to voicemail. By midnight, panic gnawed at her insides. She grabbed her coat and headed to Maren's apartment. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights were off. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Isla stepped cautiously into the darkness, calling Maren's name. Her voice echoed back at her. On the kitchen table, a single object waited. Another Polaroid photograph. This time, the image showed Maren, seated at a cafe table, her eyes wide with fear. Behind her, blurred but unmistakable, was the man Isla had seen at the lantern's rest. Written across the bottom, in the same careful handwriting, were the words. She asked too many questions. Isla's world began to unravel. The police filed a report but offered little hope, muttering about voluntary disappearance or staging. But Isla knew better. Someone had taken Maren, and she was next. Sleep became impossible. Each night, she replayed every detail, searching for meaning. Why her? Why now? Then one evening, as she combed through old notebooks, she noticed something strange. Scribbled in the margins of a sketchbook from years ago, a design she had nearly forgotten, were the same words written on that first napkin. You shouldn't be here, Isla. Her hand had written them, years before she ever set foot in the lantern's rest. A chill spread through her body. The handwriting matched perfectly. She had no memory of writing it. The discovery shook her to the core. Was she losing her mind? Or was someone reaching into her past, twisting it against her? The questions clawed at her sanity until one storm-drenched night, Isla returned to the cafe. But the lantern's rest was gone. The alley was empty, a blank stretch of wet cobblestones, as if the cafe had never existed at all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. A distorted voice crackled through the static. You've already been here before, Isla. You just don't remember. Maren's fate is only the beginning. If you want to survive, follow the signs. But understand this, you were never meant to escape. The line went dead. Isla staggered back against the wall, her breath ragged. Her heart pounded in her chest as rain slicked her face. For the first time, she felt the full weight of it, the truth she could no longer deny. She wasn't just being followed. She was trapped in something far larger, something that had been set in motion years before she could comprehend it. And whoever was pulling the strings already knew every move she was going to make. The ballroom lights glittered like 1,000 distant stars, each reflection bouncing off chandeliers and polished marble floors. Yet Isla Renmerd felt as though the world had collapsed into a single suffocating point. Her pulse thundered in her ears as whispers rippled through the crowd, their voices weaving a tapestry of suspicion and judgment that wrapped tightly around her. The accusation had been made. The shame hung heavy in the air. She could feel ice boring into her skin like hot coals. Her father, Gregory Renmerd, stood a few paces away, his gaze sharp and deliberate, his hand still hovering over the half-emptied glass he had pressed into hers only minutes earlier. The poison glass. Isla's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to keep her chin high even as the taste of betrayal lingered bitter on her tongue. A silence fell over the ballroom, thick and waiting. Then her aunt, Eleanor Fawcett, clutched her pearl necklace as though it might protect her. "This is unthinkable," she whispered, her voice trembling, but just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "How could you, Isla? Your own family." The crowd buzzed again, feeding on itself like wildfire. "I didn't," Isla said, her voice calm though her hands trembled at her sides. Every nerve screamed at her to defend herself, but desperation would only prove them right. "I have proof." The words sliced through the air. All motion seemed to stop. Her cousin Adrian, the ever-smirking opportunist who had always envied her position in the Renmerd family, raised an eyebrow. "Proof," he said with mock intrigue, his lips curling into a sneer. What proof could explain away what we all just witnessed? Isla inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She remembered the exact moment. Her father's hand, steady, choosing the glass. The toast. The camera her friend Emma had raised at that same instant, capturing the celebration. Capturing everything. My friend recorded the toast, Isla said, meeting Adrian's gaze without wavering. You will see my father placing this very glass into my hand. A ripple of unease passed through the onlookers. Some exchanged glances. Others shifted uncomfortably. Gregory's expression hardened, but only for an instant. Then he laughed, a smooth, hollow sound that echoed falsely in the gilded hall. Isla, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Clinging to a grainy little video while the evidence sits in front of us. How tragic! But Isla saw it then, the flicker in his eyes, the faint tightening of his jaw. Fear. Before anyone could respond, the ballroom doors slammed open. A tall figure entered, moving with calm precision, the kind of presence that silenced rooms. Detective Marcus Hale, a man whose reputation preceded him in every whispered corridor of the city. His gray eyes scanned the room, cool and assessing. Behind him trailed 2 officers carrying sealed evidence bags. The guests parted instantly, forming an uneasy path. I received a call, Marcus said, his voice deep and unyielding, about an incident here at the Renmerd estate. Poison wine. He glanced at Isla, then at Gregory, and finally at the glass still perched on the table. It seems I arrived just in time. Gregory straightened, his composure unshaken in appearance, though Isla noticed his knuckles whitening against the polished wood of the table. There has been a misunderstanding, Gregory said smoothly, turning toward the detective. My daughter has made a foolish claim, trying to protect herself. A child's lie. That glass was hers alone. Not a lie. Isla cut in, her voice steady now. There is video evidence. I can retrieve it. Marcus studied her with unnerving intensity, as though he could read every hidden thought. Then he nodded once. You'll show me this evidence, he said. His words were not a request but an order. Adrian laughed under his breath. This is absurd. Are we entertaining her stories? She'll say anything to worm her way out. But Marcus ignored him. Until this matter is resolved, no one leaves the estate. His command drew sharp gasps from the guests. The grand ballroom, once a haven of opulence and power, now felt like a gilded prison. As the crowd murmured, Isla caught sight of someone near the back, a familiar face she hadn't expected tonight. Elias Crawford, dark-haired, sharply dressed, with a kind of brooding intensity that unsettled as much as it captivated. He had been her closest confidant years ago, until ambition and betrayal had severed their bond. What was he doing here, watching her with that unreadable expression? Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, Isla felt the ground shift beneath her. The detective's men collected the glass and the decanter, sealing them with precision. Isla's heart raced. If she could get to Emma's phone, the recording could clear her name. But she knew Gregory would not allow that evidence to surface without a fight. Then Marcus spoke again, his tone heavier than before. Someone in this room has orchestrated a crime, and I intend to uncover who. The words rang like a gavel striking finality. The air thickened with fear, suspicion, and something darker. Isla's gaze flicked to Gregory. He was already leaning toward Adrian, whispering quickly, planning something. Her stomach twisted with dread. She realized then that this was not just about poison. It was about power, inheritance, legacy. Someone had chosen tonight to destroy her, and the night was far from over. The wind clawed at the windows of Isla Renard's apartment as though the city itself wanted to rip inside. She had barely slept after what happened the night before. Every sound, every shadow outside made her pulse throb with dread. She kept replaying the words she had heard from Victor Halden, the man who had once been her mentor and now her tormentor. He had made it clear that he wasn't finished. Her phone vibrated against the table. Isla froze. The screen lit up with an unknown number. For a long moment, she stared at it, her breath trapped in her throat, before finally swiping to answer. Ms. Renard, a deep voice said, calm but edged with menace, I trust you received my message. You're in far deeper than you realize. Meet me at the East Docks tonight at midnight. Come alone. The call ended before she could respond. Isla dropped the phone to the table, her hands trembling. Every instinct screamed not to go. But she knew she had no choice. If she ignored him, he would only escalate, and she had seen enough already to know that escalation meant blood. She needed help, but her circle of trust had shrunk dangerously small. Her best friend, Mara Ellington, had urged her to go to the police, but Isla knew Victor's reach extended into places that should have been safe. If she went that route, the wrong ear might catch wind of it, and then she'd be silenced before she ever got a chance to expose him. Her mind pulled instead toward Elias Corvin, the investigative journalist who had shown interest in her findings weeks earlier. He was relentless, fearless, sometimes reckless, but he was the only one who seemed willing to stand toe-to-toe with monsters like Victor. She found herself dialing his number. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "This better be good, Renard." "I don't have much time," Isla said, pacing the living room. "They want me at the East Docks tonight. Midnight. Alone." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "That's a setup if I've ever heard one. You're not seriously thinking of going?" "I have to," she replied, her voice cracking. "If I don't, he'll come after me and Mara too. I won't let her get dragged into this." Elias swore under his breath. "Then you're not going alone. Send me the address. I'll be there, whether you like it or not." Before Isla could argue, the line went dead. She wanted to scream, to hurl the phone across the room, but instead she forced herself to steady her breathing. She had chosen this path the moment she uncovered the files. There was no turning back now. The night air was damp, carrying the scent of salt and rust as Isla approached the East Docks. Her boots crunched against the gravel, each step echoing far louder than she intended. The fog hung low, swallowing the beams of light from the overhead lamps until the world became nothing more than a blur of shadows. A figure waited near the edge of the pier. Victor Halden, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in the haze. He wore a dark coat that shifted with the wind, his hands folded casually behind his back as if this were a casual meeting and not a trap. "You came!" Victor's voice boomed across the empty dock. "I wasn't sure if you had the courage." Isla swallowed hard, forcing steel into her tone. "You left me no choice." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of a predator who knew the prey had walked into his jaws. "You've been busy," he said, stepping closer. "Digging where you shouldn't, stirring ghosts that should have stayed buried. Do you have any idea what kind of fire you're playing with?" "I know enough," Isla shot back. "Enough to bring everything down. Enough to end you." Victor's expression darkened. "You think you're a hero, Isla, but heroes are the first to bleed." Before she could respond, a metallic clang rang out behind her. She spun just in time to see two of Victor's men emerge from the fog, their silhouettes hard and sharp. Panic surged through her, but she stood her ground. And then another figure emerged from the shadows, Elias Corvin. His camera bag was slung across his shoulder, but Isla could see the faint outline of something heavier tucked beneath his coat. He moved like a man prepared for a fight. Victor's smirk widened as he noticed him. "Ah, the journalist. I should have known you'd sniff around. Always so eager for a headline. Do you think you can protect her?" Elias stepped forward until he was at Isla's side. "Not just protect her. Expose you. The files she has, your entire empire crumbles once they go public." Victor's eyes narrowed. For the first time, a crack of unease showed in his mask of control. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by cold fury. He snapped his fingers, and his men advanced. The dock became a battleground of tension, every second stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Isla's heart pounded so violently she thought her ribs might crack. She knew this was the moment. Either she and Elias would fight their way out, or they would vanish into the fog, swallowed by Victor's darkness forever. And then a horn blared in the distance, a ship cutting through the mist. Its light swept across the dock, illuminating the scene in a harsh white glare. For a split second, everyone froze. Isla saw her chance. She grabbed Elias's hand. "Now!" she shouted. They bolted toward the shadows, the sound of Victor's enraged roar chasing after them, followed by pounding footsteps. The chase had begun. That night marked the beginning of Isla Renard's transformation from hunted to hunter. For the first time, she realized the only way to survive was to stop running and strike first. The storm was no longer just around her. It was inside her now, and Victor Halden had no idea what he had unleashed. The walls of Isla Renard's world seemed to close in the night she returned to her apartment after the disastrous dinner with Marcus and Evelyn. Rain lashed the city streets, and the steady drumming on her window echoed the turmoil within her chest. She sat on the edge of her bed, soaked from the storm, replaying the night's conversation in her head. Every glance, every smirk, every carefully chosen word Evelyn had tossed across the table felt like sharpened glass pressed against her skin. Marcus had noticed her trembling hands but had brushed them off as nerves, never realizing the magnitude of what Evelyn's presence meant. She pulled out her journal, something she had not touched in weeks, and forced her hand to move. Words poured across the page in jagged lines, as if writing them could loosen the tightening noose around her throat. They know something. Evelyn is circling me like a predator. Marcus is blind to it all. I cannot tell him yet, but he must sense it soon. The shadows are pressing closer, and I feel like I am running out of time. The following morning, Isla forced herself into routine. She brewed coffee, dressed in professional composure, and prepared for her day. The museum called her presence, the artifacts she worked with, grounding her in history's truths rather than the lies spinning around her present life. Yet even among the ancient relics and quiet halls, she felt watched. A man lingered too long in the corner of the gallery, pretending to admire the exhibits while his eyes flicked repeatedly to her. When she walked past, his hand brushed against his coat pocket, and the faint outline of something metallic beneath the fabric made her breath catch. Isla made a calculated decision. Instead of rushing back to Marcus with half-formed suspicions, she began to gather her evidence. That night, she retraced her steps from the week before, visiting the quiet bookshop where she had first encountered Evelyn unexpectedly. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with cloudy eyes, remembered Isla instantly. "Strange woman, that one," she said when Isla carefully described Evelyn. "She asked too many questions about you. Not about books, no, but about you. Said she needed to confirm your habits, your schedule, even what authors you preferred." The shopkeeper shook her head. I told her nothing, but she smiled as if she already knew the answers. The chill of realization worked down Isla's spine. Evelyn's presence was not a coincidence. It was orchestrated, deliberate, targeted. Back home, Marcus sensed her unease, but his attempts at comfort only deepened her guilt. He wrapped his arms around her and whispered promises of safety, but his warmth could not mask the silent questions burning in his eyes. She wanted to tell him everything, but feared dragging him deeper into the storm. Instead, she kissed him and held the words back like a dam straining against the flood. The next few days spun into a blur of tension. Isla discovered subtle signs of intrusion in her life. Papers on her desk are slightly out of place. A faint smell of unfamiliar cologne lingering in her apartment. The lock on her balcony door scratched as if tested with tools. Each detail was small enough to dismiss, but together they screamed of someone tightening their grip. One evening, returning home later than usual, Isla found a sealed envelope resting on her kitchen counter. There was no sign of forced entry this time, no broken locks, just the unnerving certainty that someone had crossed into her sanctuary again. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a single photograph of Marcus, captured from afar as he entered his office building, oblivious to being watched. Beneath the photo, in neat block letters, was a message. He doesn't know the truth. How long until he finds out from me instead of you? The weight of the threat pressed against her ribs, forcing her to the floor. She realized the enemy was no longer circling, they were inside, playing with her fears, steering her choices. Her instincts told her to run to Marcus, but her mind cautioned restraint. Whoever was behind this wanted her cornered, desperate, exposed. If she panicked, she would play directly into their hands. Isla locked the envelope in her desk drawer, her resolve hardening like steel. If Evelyn thought she could manipulate her into unraveling, she underestimated the strength that had carried Isla through years of solitude and secrets. But Marcus was not blind. That night as they lay in bed, his hand lingered over hers, and his voice broke through the silence. "Isla, you're pulling away from me. I can feel it. Whatever is haunting you, let me carry some of it. Please, don't fight this battle alone." His plea cracked something within her, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. A new message appeared from an unknown number. "Tomorrow at midnight. The rooftop of the old Calderon Hotel. Come alone if you want him safe. The words seared into her vision, and a cold dread settled in her stomach. The Calderon Hotel had been abandoned for years, a decaying monument of broken glass and hollow halls. The perfect stage for a confrontation. She deleted the message instantly, praying Marcus had not seen it. His concerned eyes searched her face, but she forced a small smile, whispering that everything was fine. Yet her pulse thundered in betrayal of her lie. Sleep evaded her entirely. By dawn, she had made her decision. She would go to the Calderon Hotel, no matter the risk. The enemy wanted her alone, and she would give them that. Not because she trusted them, but because she needed to unmask them on her terms. For too long, she had lived in the shadows of unanswered questions. Now she would drag the truth into the light, even if it meant stepping deeper into the darkness herself. Isla stared at Marcus sleeping peacefully beside her, unaware of the storm building just beyond their fragile peace. She touched his face gently, memorizing the quiet strength in his features. Then she rose, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the rain-streaked window. The city awaited, and with it, the reckoning she could no longer delay. And so, with her heart pounding and her resolve burning, Isla Renard stepped into the fourth chapter of her unraveling fate, knowing that by the following midnight her life, and Marcus's, would never be the same. The chill in the air carried the promise of rain when Isla stepped out of the car in front of the dimly lit inn on the outskirts of Ravencourt. She was exhausted, her body weighed down by sleepless nights and restless thoughts that circled like vultures over her spirit. Yet beneath the exhaustion was a pulse of determination, the unrelenting drive that had carried her this far despite every betrayal, every unanswered question, and every shadow that clung to her path. Elias followed her inside, his eyes scanning the lobby with the careful awareness of someone who trusted nothing and no one. He had insisted on staying by her side, though Isla's emotions toward him had grown as complex as the web they were caught in. His loyalty was undeniable, but so was the unspoken truth that he carried secrets of his own. The innkeeper, a wiry man with deep lines carved into his weathered face, greeted them with a politeness that felt rehearsed. Isla offered a faint smile, signing the register with a false name Elias had chosen. As she pressed the pen to the paper, she felt an odd sensation crawling up her spine, the sensation of being watched. She glanced around but saw only shadows and silence. Once inside their room, Elias drew the curtains tight and checked the locks. Isla dropped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as if it might reveal the answer she sought. The events of the last few days had twisted everything she thought she knew. Lucian's sudden return, his cryptic warnings, and his confession of a past intertwined with hers had left her heart in turmoil. She had tried to bury her feelings for him once, to silence the longing that never fully died, but seeing him again had torn the wound wide open. "Do you ever feel," Isla asked softly, "like we are walking inside someone else's story, written long before we ever had a chance to choose our roles?" Elias paused, his eyes flicking to her with a gravity that made her breath catch. "Every day," he said. "And the trick is surviving long enough to find the pen and write your ending." His words struck her with more weight than she expected. Isla turned her face away, afraid that if she looked at him too long, she might start to believe in something she wasn't ready to trust. The rain came just after midnight, pounding against the window with relentless rhythm. Isla tossed in her sleep, haunted by dreams that shifted between fragments of memory and twisted visions. She saw her mother's face blurred by fog, Lucian reaching out for her across a widening gulf, and Elias watching silently from the edge of the shadows. The dream dissolved into whispers, voices she could not recognize but that seemed to know her name, repeating it again and again until she woke in a cold sweat. She sat up, her breath ragged, only to realize the whispers had not stopped. They lingered faintly in the air, real and immediate. Elias was already standing at the window, his jaw clenched. "They're here," he said in a voice laced with fury. Before Isla could respond, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. She clutched the edge of the bed as Elias pulled a small blade from his coat, his stance tense. A knock came at the door, slow, deliberate, each strike echoing like a countdown. "Stay behind me," Elias whispered. The door creaked open with a groan, though neither of them had touched it. A shadow slid across the threshold, tall and unnaturally still. Isla's heart thundered as her eyes struggled to adjust. The figure stepped forward, its face obscured, but its presence radiated a coldness that clawed at her bones. Isla Renard, the voice spoke, low and venomous. You should have stayed buried in the lies they built for you. She froze. How did the stranger know her true name, the one she had not signed in the register? Elias moved with lightning speed, lunging forward, but the figure retreated as if made of smoke, vanishing into the storm beyond the door. The silence left in its wake was suffocating. Isla's chest rose and fell as though she had run miles, her pulse refusing to slow. Elias slammed the door shut and locked it, his blade still trembling faintly in his grip. "Who was that?" Isla demanded, her voice sharp with fear and anger. Elias hesitated too long before answering. "Someone who shouldn't know you exist. Someone who has been waiting." The betrayal in his tone was not directed at her but at himself, as though he had failed in a way he could not forgive. Isla studied him, the unease spreading deeper. For the first time, she wondered not just what Elias was hiding but whether he was capable of protecting her from what was coming. When dawn broke, they left the inn behind, but Isla could not shake the memory of that voice. It wasn't just the threat, it was the familiarity, as if she had heard it once before in the hazy corridors of her past. Her thoughts circled back to Lucien, to the fragments he had revealed and the ones he had kept locked away. By evening, they arrived at an abandoned chapel on the edge of a crumbling village. According to Elias, the chapel was a meeting place for those who opposed the faceless power that had shaped Isla's life from the shadows. The air inside smelled of dust and forgotten prayers, the cracked stained glass windows casting broken colors onto the stone floor. Isla lit a candle, the small flame trembling in the draught. She felt both comforted and unnerved by the quiet. Elias busied himself with scouting the perimeter, leaving her momentarily alone. As the flame flickered, Isla's eyes were drawn to the far end of the chapel where a wooden door hung slightly ajar. Something compelled her to move toward it. Her fingers brushed the worn wood, and she pushed it open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A chill seeped out from below, raising goosebumps across her skin. She hesitated but felt a pull, as though her very soul demanded she step forward. She descended slowly, each creak of the steps echoing louder than it should. At the bottom, she found a small chamber carved into the earth, its walls lined with shelves of faded books and locked chests. At the center stood a single table, upon which rested a leather-bound journal. Isla approached with trembling hands, opening it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read the first line, written in an elegant hand she recognized instantly. "To my daughter, Isla Renard." Her heart lurched violently. The journal was her mother's. She flipped through page after page, her breath catching on the revelations. Secrets, names, warnings. And at the end, one chilling sentence written in haste. "Trust no one, not even the ones who love you most." The candle in her hand guttered, and behind her came the sound of footsteps. Isla turned slowly, the journal pressed against her chest. Elias stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Where did you find that?" he asked softly. And in that moment, she realized the warning may have already come too late. The night air was heavy with silence as Isla Renard sat alone in her apartment, the dim light from a single lamp casting long shadows against the wall. The documents she had stolen from Victor's private safe were spread out across the table, pages of numbers, coded emails, hidden accounts, and signatures that linked him to a chain of crimes far worse than she had imagined. Fraud, laundering, secret deals with dangerous people. Every line screamed corruption. Isla's hands trembled as she traced her finger across Victor's name on the papers, her mind racing with the weight of what she now held. This was no longer just a fight for justice or truth. This was survival. Her phone buzzed, and when she answered, the voice on the other end was low and urgent. It was Elias, his tone stripped of the calm confidence she had come to rely on. He warned her that Victor's men had been watching her all day. They knew she had something, and if she made a wrong move, she would vanish like the others who had crossed him. Isla's pulse quickened. The walls of her apartment suddenly felt too close, her breath shallow as she imagined faceless eyes peering through her windows. She gathered the files, stuffing them into a leather bag, and forced herself to think clearly. Panic would be Victor's greatest weapon against her, and she couldn't let him win that easily. She replayed every conversation, every warning Elias had given her. Trust no one. Always stay 2 steps ahead. And most importantly, never underestimate how far Victor was willing to go. The memory of the night Victor had looked into her eyes and told her he controlled everything returned to her with a sharp sting. She remembered the way his smile curved when he believed he had broken her spirit, but she also remembered the way Elias had taken her hand in the alley the night she escaped and whispered that she was stronger than Victor's entire empire. That whisper had stayed with her, an anchor when the chaos threatened to drown her. She needed to move. Isla grabbed her coat, slid the bag over her shoulder, and headed out into the cold city streets. The rain had begun to fall in a steady rhythm, blurring the neon lights into smears of color. She kept her head low, her steps steady, weaving through crowds and ducking into side streets where shadows swallowed her from view. She didn't know where she was going yet, only that she couldn't stay still. Elias had told her about a safe house once, hidden in the industrial district, a place where the walls had no ears and the locks couldn't be picked. She decided that was her destination. But even as she moved toward it, she sensed movement behind her, footsteps quickening when hers did, pausing when she paused. Her chest tightened. Victor's men were here. She ducked into a narrow alley, her shoes splashing against puddles as she ran. The sound of pursuit grew louder, shadows dancing on the walls as figures closed in. Her breath came ragged, her heart slamming against her ribs. She reached for her phone to call Elias, but before she could dial, a hand clamped down on her wrist. She spun, ready to fight, when a familiar voice hissed her name. It was Elias. His eyes burned with urgency as he pulled her deeper into the alley. They slipped through a hidden door she would never have noticed, and within moments, the chaos of the street was shut out, replaced by the stillness of an abandoned building. Isla's body shook as adrenaline surged through her, her hand clutching the bag of secrets like it was her only lifeline. Elias pressed his back against the wall, his chest heaving, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other. The silence between them was thick with everything unspoken, fear, trust, and something deeper, something fragile yet unbreakable. He stepped closer, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle against the storm raging outside. "You've gone too deep now," he whispered, his voice low but steady. "Victor will burn everything to find you. But you're not alone in this. I'm here." Isla swallowed hard, torn between the weight of the danger and the warmth in his eyes. The tension was suffocating, not just from fear, but from the undeniable current pulling them together. She wanted to lean into him, to let the chaos fade away for even a heartbeat, but she forced herself back to reality. "We don't have time," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We need to use what I found. These papers, they're enough to destroy him." Elias looked at the bag, his expression tightening. "If we move too soon, we're dead. Victor has people everywhere. We have to be precise. One mistake, and he'll bury us before the truth ever comes out." The air between them grew heavier. Every choice was a gamble, every second counted. Isla knew he was right, but patience felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She couldn't keep running forever. Victor had already stolen too much from her life, and she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Elias's hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer before he let go. His voice softened as he said, "We'll bring him down, Isla. But until then, you need to trust me. And you need to be ready for what it will cost." Her chest ached at his words, the truth of them cutting deeper than the cold night air. She nodded slowly, the fire in her eyes returning. No matter the cost, she would not stop. Yet in the quiet of that hidden room, with danger pressing closer from every side, Isla felt something shift inside her. The line between survival and surrender blurred, and the closeness of Elias was no longer just protection. It was the first spark of something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. But outside, in the dark veins of the city, Victor's reach stretched further than either of them could see. He had already set his plans in motion, and Isla's stolen truth had triggered something irreversible. The game had changed, and the next move would not be hers to make. The storm outside raged as though it had been waiting for this night, the thunder rolling like drums of judgment. Isla Renmerd stood inside the abandoned mansion on the cliffs, her breath echoing against the hollow walls, her heart pounding with the weight of everything that had brought her here. The air smelled of damp wood and old secrets, and every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet reminded her that she was not alone. Adrian's betrayal still burned in her chest, but it was not just betrayal anymore. It was a dagger carved deep with layers of truth she had only begun to uncover. His connection with Victor, the man orchestrating the chain of tragedies that had plagued her life, had been revealed like a blade unsheathed. Yet Adrian had chosen to stand with her now, against the man who had once been his mentor, his shadow and his curse. "Stay close to me," Adrian whispered, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed the storm within him. "Whatever happens, do not let him draw you in. He thrives on fear." Isla nodded, clutching the old leather-bound journal tighter in her hand. This journal, her mother's final legacy, contained the truth Victor wanted buried forever. Inside its pages lay the evidence of crimes spanning decades, corporate greed, false alliances, and murder staged as accidents. It was the missing piece of the puzzle that had consumed her every step since her father's death. From the shadows of the hall, Victor emerged, calm and deliberate. His suit was pristine despite the weather, his smile thin and venomous. "You've come farther than I expected, Isla," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who believed himself untouchable. "But bravery without wisdom is only another form of death." Adrian stepped forward, shielding her. "This ends tonight, Victor. You've taken enough from her, from me, from everyone you ever touched. It ends now." Victor's laugh was low, mocking. "Adrian, my protégé, is still blinded by sentiment. You could have ruled beside me, yet you cling to her as though she is salvation. She is your weakness." Isla felt the tremor of doubt ripple through Adrian, but she reached for his hand, steady and unyielding. "I am no one's weakness," she said, her voice cutting through the storm. "I am his strength, just as he is mine. And together we will expose you." Victor's eyes narrowed, his facade cracking. "Expose me? Do you think anyone will believe the words of a grieving daughter, clinging to fantasies of justice? This world was built on men like me, and it will burn before it bows to truth." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in blinding white. Isla opened the journal, the ink smudged but legible. She began to read aloud, her mother's words filling the chamber like a voice returned from the grave. Each confession was a blade against Victor's composure, each revelation a stone in the collapse of the empire he had built. "You forged deaths to silence those who opposed you," she read, her voice unwavering. "You poisoned trust, stole futures, and carved graves for the innocent. My father's blood is on your hands, Victor, and so is my mother's." Victor lunged forward, rage overtaking his calm, but Adrian intercepted him. The clash between them was brutal, raw, every strike fueled by years of betrayal and unspoken vengeance. Isla held the journal close, refusing to falter as the storm roared outside, as the foundations of the mansion seemed to tremble with each blow. Finally, with one decisive strike, Adrian forced Victor to the ground, his weapon clattering across the floor. Isla stepped forward, the journal in one hand, her mother's locket in the other. She crouched beside the man who had haunted her life and met his eyes without flinching. "This is not just about vengeance," she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "This is about truth, and truth cannot be buried forever." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closing in. Victor's expression twisted from fury to something darker, an acceptance laced with malice. "You think you've won," he hissed, blood staining his lips. "But you've only begun a war you cannot imagine. For every secret you reveal, there are 10 more waiting, and they will consume you." His words lingered in the air as the authorities stormed the mansion, dragging him away in chains. Isla stood in silence, her heart pounding, Adrian's hand finding hers. Together, they stepped into the rain-soaked night, the journal safe in her grasp. The storm had broken, but the echoes of Victor's warning clung to her mind. Even as the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Isla knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of another. Adrian brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his eyes searching hers. "We're free now," he whispered, though his voice carried the weight of doubt. Isla gazed at the horizon, the journal pressing against her chest, her mother's locket warm in her palm. "Free," she repeated, her voice trembling between hope and fear. But for how long? The sun rose, and with it came the fragile promise of peace. Yet in the shadows that linger behind them, the seeds of a new storm stirred, unseen and waiting.